The dashboard camera captured it all. Officer Derek Moss, badge 4721, leaning through the window of a black Harley-Davidson at 11:47 p.m. on Route 9, just outside Pineville. The rider's name was Clay Brennan, a man who'd spent 23 years riding with the Iron Covenant, a brotherhood built on honor, loyalty, and one unbreakable rule: never let corruption go unanswered. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe. Stories like this one remind us why honor still matters. What started as a routine traffic stop became something far darker. Moss didn't ask for a license. He didn't check registration. He simply said, "You got two choices, biker. 500 cash right now, or I impound the bike and you spend the weekend in county." Clay handed over the money, not because he was afraid, but because he knew something Moss didn't. Clay had friends, a lot of them, and by sunrise, every single one would know what happened on that highway. The night air was thick with humidity, the kind that made leather stick to skin and chrome shine like liquid mercury under streetlights. Clay had been riding since dawn, making his way back from a veterans' memorial service 3 states over. His back ached, his eyes burned, but the road had always been his therapy, his church, his way of processing the things that kept him awake at 3 a.m. The rumble of the engine beneath him was the only sound that made sense anymore. Steady, reliable, honest. Route 9 stretched ahead like a black ribbon through farmland and forest, dotted with the occasional gas station or abandoned roadside attraction. Clay knew every mile of it, knew where the deer liked to cross, knew which curves tightened without warning, knew exactly where cops liked to sit and wait for speeders looking to shave 5 minutes off their drive home. Tonight, one was waiting. Within 6 hours, the Iron Covenant had mobilized. By 6 a.m., 200 riders from 7 states were rolling toward Pineville Police Station, engines roaring in perfect unison, a wall of chrome and leather that stretched half a mile down Main Street. They didn't come for violence, they came for justice. And they brought something Moss never expected, proof that he'd done this before, dozens of times to dozens of riders over 3 years. The Iron Covenant wasn't a gang. They didn't deal drugs, didn't run guns, didn't terrorize neighborhoods or shake down businesses. They were firefighters, mechanics, veterans, nurses, teachers, people who'd found something on the road that they couldn't find anywhere else. A sense of belonging, a code that meant something. A family that showed up when blood family disappeared. They'd lost brothers to cancer, to war, to accidents on wet roads at midnight. They'd buried friends in cemeteries from Virginia to Tennessee, standing in the rain with their patches soaked through, promising the dead that they'd look after the living. That promise wasn't symbolic. It was literal. When one of them got hurt, all of them felt it. When one of them got wronged, all of them answered. What Officer Moss thought was easy money became the biggest mistake of his career. What Clay Brennan thought was a simple shakedown became a reckoning that would expose an entire network of corruption and remind a small town that some promises are written in asphalt, exhaust, and brotherhood. Because in the world of the Iron Covenant, there were lines you didn't cross, and taking from a brother, that was the deepest line of all. The night smelled like rain and gasoline. Clay Brennan rolled down Route 9 at exactly 63 miles per hour, 10 below the posted limit, his headlight cutting through the dark like a blade. The Harley hummed beneath him, steady, loyal, familiar. He'd ridden this highway 1,000 times. Knew every curve, every pothole, every place where cops liked to wait. The bike was a 2018 Street Glide, black as midnight with just enough chrome to catch light without being flashy. Clay had bought it used from a brother who'd moved to Arizona, spent 6 months rebuilding the engine in his garage, replacing every gasket and seal until it ran smoother than the day it rolled off the assembly line. The seat was worn in all the right places. The mirrors were adjusted perfectly. The saddlebags carried exactly what he needed and nothing more. A rain jacket, a first aid kit, a toolkit wrapped in oilcloth, and a flask of bourbon he'd never opened but always carried. He'd left the memorial service just after sunset, said his goodbyes to men he hadn't seen in 5 years, men who'd served with him in places nobody talked about anymore. They'd stood around a granite marker with a name carved into it. Danny Cortez, 1983-2019, brother, soldier, rider. And they'd shared stories about the time Danny ran his bike out of gas in the middle of nowhere and had to push it 3 miles uphill, or the time he'd talked his way out of a ticket by convincing the cop they'd gone to high school together even though they'd never met. The memorial had been good, necessary. The kind of thing that reminded Clay why the road mattered, why the brotherhood mattered, why showing up for people even after they were gone was the only thing that separated honor from noise. Tonight, one was waiting. The cruiser sat tucked behind a rusted billboard advertising a defunct motel, the Starlight Inn, vacancy, as if anyone had checked in since 1987. Clay saw the silhouette before the lights came on, saw the outline of the Ford Interceptor with its push bar and antenna array, saw the faint glow of a phone screen inside the cab. He'd been riding long enough to recognize the setup. Cop parked in the shadows, waiting for someone to drift 5 miles over the limit or forget to signal a lane change. Clay wasn't worried. His bike was legal. His license was current. His insurance card was tucked in his wallet, right next to his DD-214 and a photo of his daughter. The lights came on, blue and red, strobing across the asphalt, washing over his mirrors like neon ghosts. Clay pulled over without hesitation, easing the Harley onto the shoulder, killing the engine, kicking down the stand. He pulled off his gloves, tucked them under the seat and waited. Officer Derek Moss stepped out slowly, one hand resting on his belt. He was tall, mid-40s, with a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. Broad shoulders, thick neck, the kind of build that came from high school football, followed by 20 years of desk work and fast food. His uniform was crisp, his boots polished, his badge catching the flashing lights and throwing them back like a mirror. He approached from the left side, unusual, and stopped just short of the handlebars. Most cops approached from behind, gave themselves an angle, kept their distance. Moss came right up close, close enough that Clay could smell coffee and cologne. License and registration. Clay handed them over without a word. Moss took them, but didn't look at them, didn't shine his flashlight on the plastic cards, didn't walk back to his cruiser to run the plates, just held them loosely in one hand while his other hand stayed on his belt, fingers drumming against the leather. "You know why I stopped you?" "No, sir." Moss tapped the side mirror with his flashlight, not hard, just enough to make a point, to assert dominance, to remind Clay who had the power here on this empty stretch of highway at 1:45. Headlights too bright, blinding oncoming traffic. Clay frowned. It's factory standard. DOT approved. He'd checked it himself 3 months ago, made sure the alignment was correct, made sure it wasn't angled too high or throwing glare into windshields. He'd even replaced the bulb with a newer LED unit that met every federal regulation. Moss shrugged. "Not how I see it." The silence stretched. Somewhere in the distance, a semi rumbled past on the northbound lanes, its running lights disappearing into the dark. The wind carried the smell of wet dirt and diesel, of cornfields and coming storms. Crickets sang in the grass beyond the shoulder. A dog barked somewhere far off. Clay waited. He'd been through traffic stops before, knew the rhythm. The cop would lecture him, maybe write a warning, maybe let him off with a reminder to get it checked. Either way, it would be over in 5 minutes. But Moss wasn't moving. He just stood there, flashlight tapping against the mirror, eyes fixed on Clay like he was waiting for something. "Here's the thing," Moss said finally, leaning closer. "I can write you up, impound the bike for inspection, have you cooling your heels in county while we sort it out. Probably take 3-4 days, maybe a week if the impound lot's backed up. You'd miss work. Miss whatever you got going on. Bike could be sitting there racking up storage fees." He paused. "Or you can make this easy. 500 cash, right now. We both go home. You get back on the road. I forget I ever saw you." Clay's jaw tightened. He'd heard stories like this before. Riders getting shaken down on back highways by cops who saw leather and assumed money. assumed silence, assumed nobody would fight back because bikers didn't trust the system, didn't expect justice from people who wore badges and carried guns. He thought about refusing, thought about demanding to see a supervisor, thought about recording the conversation on his phone. But Moss's hand was still on his belt, still close to his service weapon, and they were alone on a dark road with no witnesses and no cameras except the one in the cruiser, which Moss probably knew how to turn off. Clay pulled out his wallet, counted 5 bills, 200s, 250s, 520s, money he'd been saving for new tires, money that represented 10 hours of overtime at the machine shop where he worked fabricating parts for industrial equipment. He handed them over. Moss pocketed them without counting, without receipt, without documentation. Smart choice, biker. Drive safe. He walked back to the cruiser. The lights went off. The engine started. Moss pulled back onto Route 9 and disappeared into the night, leaving Clay sitting on the shoulder with his hands gripping the throttle and his heart hammering in his chest. For a long moment, Clay just sat there, listened to the wind, watched the taillights fade to nothing, felt the anger building in his gut like a fire that had just found oxygen. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. "Logan, it's me. We got a problem." Logan, chains. Mercer answered on the second ring. "Talk to me." His voice was rough, gravelly, the product of 30 years shouting over engine noise and 2 decades smoking cigarettes before he'd quit cold turkey on his 50th birthday. He was lying in bed, reading a Louis L'Amour Western by lamplight, while his wife slept beside him. The phone had buzzed on the nightstand, and he'd seen Clay's name on the screen and known immediately that something was wrong. Clay didn't call at midnight unless it mattered. Clay told him everything. The stop, the shakedown, the casual arrogance in Moss's voice. Like this was routine, like he'd done it 100 times before and expected to do it 100 times more. He described the way Moss had pocketed the money, the way he'd walked back to his cruiser without looking back, the way he'd driven off like nothing had happened. Logan listened without interrupting. He was the road captain of the Iron Covenant, the man who coordinated rides, settled disputes, handled logistics, and made sure the Brotherhood stayed true to its code. He'd been riding since he was 19, back when helmets were optional and speed limits were suggestions. He'd buried 17 brothers over 3 decades, pulled 3 more out of wrecked bikes on the side of highways, testified at trials, organized fundraisers, mediated conflicts between chapters. He knew corruption when he heard it. "You got a badge number?" "Yeah, 4721. "Good. Hang tight. I'll make some calls." Logan hung up and immediately swung his legs out of bed, pulled on jeans and a t-shirt, and walked out to the garage. His bike sat in the center of the space, surrounded by toolboxes and spare parts and framed photos of rides from years past. He didn't start it, just sat on it, hands on the grips, breathing in the smell of oil and leather while his mind worked through the problem. He pulled out his phone and started dialing. First call, Marcus Wrench Thompson in Richmond, a mechanic who'd been with the Covenant for 15 years. "Marcus, Logan, I need you to ask around. Anyone in your chapter get pulled over on Route 9 near Pineville in the last year? Cop named Moss, badge 4721, asking for cash to make tickets disappear." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, "Shit. Yeah, my cousin got hit last summer. $50. Said the cop threatened to impound his bike for a broken taillight that wasn't even broken." "He report it?" "Nah. Figured nobody'd believe him. Get me his number. I'll call him." Second call, Nina Reyes in Greensboro, a nurse who ran the North Carolina chapter. "Nina, Logan. Quick question. Any of your riders mention getting shaken down by a cop on Route 9? "Actually, yeah, 2 of them. Both said it happened late at night. Both said the cop asked for cash. Why?" "Because it just happened to Clay. I'm putting together a list. Send me their contact info." Third call, Tommy Axel Chen in Knoxville, a firefighter who'd been riding with the Covenant since his 20s. "Tommy, Logan here. You know anyone who got pulled over near Pineville and asked to pay cash to avoid a ticket?" "Jesus, yeah. Happened to my brother-in-law last spring. He's not in the club, but I remember him telling me about it. Said he paid $200 to some cop who threatened to impound his car. Car? Not a bike? Yeah, car. Logan's jaw tightened. If Moss was hitting cars too, this wasn't about targeting bikers. This was about targeting anyone he thought wouldn't fight back. By the time Logan finished making calls, he had 6 names, 6 riders, and 1 civilian who'd been shaken down on Route 9 in the last 18 months. Same cop, same story, pay cash or lose your vehicle. None of them had reported it. Bikers didn't trust the system, didn't expect justice from people who wore the same uniform as the man shaking them down. And civilians, they assumed filing a complaint would just make things worse. But the Iron Covenant wasn't bound by those rules. Logan sent a mass text to the regional chapters: Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, Georgia. Brother shaken down by badge 4721 on Route 9. Moss, Derrick, Pineville PD. Need bodies at the station by dawn. Full colors, no violence, just presence, pass it on. The responses came fast. Virginia chapter rolling, 12 riders. North Carolina, 18 confirmed. Tennessee, we're in, 25 bikes. South Carolina, count us, 15. Kentucky, 14 riders ready. West Virginia, 10 confirmed. Georgia, bringing 20. By midnight, the count was at 140. By 1 a.m., it hit 170. By 3 a.m., it reached 200. Logan called Clay back at 3:47 a.m. "How's your morning look?" Clay, who hadn't slept, who'd been sitting in his garage, staring at his bike and thinking about all the times he'd let things slide because fighting back seemed impossible, smiled for the first time that night. "Wide open." "Good. We roll at 5. Meet at the truck stop on Highway 52, full colors. Tell everyone to bring cameras. And Clay?" "Yeah?" "This ends today." They assembled in a gravel lot 5 miles outside Pineville, a sprawl of chrome and leather under a sky turning from black to bruised purple. The sound was overwhelming, 200 motorcycles idling in unison, a low roar that vibrated through bone and asphalt, that rattled windows in the truck stop diner and set off car alarms in the parking lot. The air smelled like exhaust and coffee and anticipation. Logan stood on the bed of a pickup truck, arms crossed, surveying the crowd. These weren't weekend warriors. These weren't cosplayers who bought leather jackets and rode to Starbucks on Sunday mornings. These were lifers, men and women who'd earned their patches through loyalty, miles and blood. Some were veterans who'd come home from wars nobody wanted to talk about anymore. Some were firefighters who'd pulled bodies from burning buildings. Some were nurses who'd held dying patients' hands at 3 a.m. when there was nobody else left. Some were just people who'd found family on the road when home had nothing left to offer. We're riding through Pineville at sunset, where justice meets loyalty. Drop a comment if you believe some promises can't be broken. Clay stood beside the truck, watching faces he'd known for decades. There was Marcus, the mechanic who'd rebuilt Clay's transmission for free after Clay's daughter got sick and the medical bills ate through his savings. There was Nina, who'd organized a blood drive when one of their brothers needed emergency surgery. There was Tommy, who'd shown up at Clay's house at 2 a.m. with a bottle of bourbon and a listening ear after Clay's divorce went through. These were the people who mattered, the ones who showed up, the ones who kept promises. Logan raised his hand. The engines quieted, not silent, but low enough that his voice carried across the lot. "Listen up," Logan's voice cut through the rumble. "We're not here to start a war. We're here to finish one. Officer Derrick Moss has been shaking down riders for years, taking money, threatening impounds, banking on the fact that we won't speak up because we don't trust the system and the system doesn't trust us." He paused, letting the words settle. "Today, we speak up. We ride to Pineville PD. We park. We wait. We don't touch anyone. We don't threaten anyone. We don't give them any reason to call us thugs or criminals or whatever the hell they want to call us. We just show up. We let them see what 200 riders look like when they're done being quiet, when they're done being invisible, when they're done letting corruption slide because fighting back seems impossible." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. One more thing, Logan said, his voice hardening. We've got proof. Dashcam footage from Clay's stop, bank records showing deposits that don't match Moss's salary, statements from 8 riders willing to go on record, names, dates, amounts. We've got testimony from a civilian who got hit too, which means this isn't just about us. We're not asking for a favor. We're not begging for justice. We're demanding accountability. And if they don't give it to us, we'll make sure every news station from here to the state capitol knows what happened. He stepped down. Clay walked up beside him. You ready for this? Logan asked quietly. Clay nodded. Been ready since he took my money. Logan clapped him on the shoulder. Good, because once we roll, there's no turning back. This is going to be loud. This is going to make headlines. And some people are going to hate us for it. You good with that? I'm good with the truth, Clay said. Whatever comes after that, I can live with. At 5:47 a.m., they rolled out. A convoy so long it looked like a parade. Engines synchronized, headlights blazing as the sun crept over the horizon like a promise being kept. The lead bikes carried flags. American flags, POWMIA flags, chapter flags with eagles and skulls, and the words Iron Covenant stitched in silver thread. The riders moved in perfect formation, 2 by 2, maintaining speed, maintaining distance, a display of discipline that would have made any military convoy proud. They passed through farmland where mist clung to fields of soybeans and corn. They passed through small towns where people were just starting their day, stepping out onto porches with coffee mugs and newspapers, stopping to stare at the endless line of motorcycles rolling past. Some waved, some frowned, some pulled out phones to record. Pineville had never seen anything like it. Main Street was still asleep when they arrived. The first bike turned onto the road at 6:03 a.m., engine rumbling like distant thunder, then another, then 10, then 50. By the time the last rider pulled in, the convoy stretched from the police station all the way to the old courthouse 3 blocks down, a river of chrome and leather that glittered in the early morning light. They parked in perfect formation, row after row of motorcycles gleaming in the early light, riders standing beside their machines, arms crossed, silent, no chanting, no signs, no raised fists or shouted slogans, just presence, just 200 people standing in absolute stillness, staring at the 2-story brick building that housed Pineville Police Department. The silence was louder than any protest. Inside the station, Officer Derek Moss was pouring his second coffee when dispatch called. Derek, you need to come see this." Moss walked to the front window with his mug in hand, expecting maybe a fender bender or a stray dog situation. He stopped cold. 200 bikers, standing in absolute silence, staring at the building. His coffee hit the floor, ceramic shattering, dark liquid spreading across tile. Sergeant Paula Hendricks stepped up beside him. She was 47, 22 years on the force, a woman who'd worked her way up from patrol to desk sergeant through sheer competence and refusal to be intimidated by men who thought badges made them untouchable. She looked out the window, then at Moss, then back at the window. "What the hell did you do?" Moss said nothing. His mouth had gone dry, his hands were shaking. He recognized one of the bikes, the Black Street Glide near the front, the same one he'd pulled over last night. Chief Raymond Carter emerged from his office, still buttoning his uniform. He was 62, a man who'd spent 40 years in law enforcement, started as a beat cop in Raleigh, worked his way through detective, sergeant, lieutenant, finally landing the chief position in Pineville 15 years ago. He'd prided himself on keeping Pineville quiet, peaceful, predictable, the kind of town where the biggest crimes were shoplifting at the Dollar General and teenagers spray painting the water tower. This was none of those things. He walked to the window, counted bikes, counted riders, felt his stomach sink. "Someone want to tell me what's happening?" Hendricks jerked her thumb at Moss. "Ask him." Carter turned to Moss. "Derek?" Moss couldn't speak. His throat had closed up. His brain was screaming at him to run, to get in his car and drive as far as possible. to disappear before whatever was about to happen happened. Carter's eyes narrowed. He'd seen that look before. Guilt written so clearly across someone's face it might as well have been tattooed there. Outside. Now. He walked out the front door, Hendricks following. The moment the door opened, every eye turned toward him. 200 faces, impassive, waiting. Logan stepped forward. He wore his Covenant patch over a leather vest, jeans, boots. No helmet, no sunglasses, no attempt to hide or intimidate. Just a man with a manila folder tucked under his arm and a look that said he'd driven a long way for this conversation. Chief Carter, my name's Logan Mercer. Road captain of the Iron Covenant, we need to talk. Carter glanced at the folder, at the riders, at the cameras already recording from half a dozen phones mounted on handlebars. Inside, he said quietly. The conference room smelled like stale coffee and old paperwork. Chief Carter sat across from Logan and Clay, the manila folder open between them. Inside, printed bank statements going back 3 years, dashcam footage burned onto 3 USB drives, and signed affidavits from 8 riders, all detailing the same pattern. Late-night stops, fabricated violations, cash demands ranging from $50 to $500, threats of impoundment, threats of arrest, threats designed to make people comply rather than fight. Carter read in silence. His jaw tightened with every page. His fingers drummed against the table, a nervous habit he'd picked up in his detective days, back when reading case files meant deciding whether someone's life was about to get destroyed. Outside, through the conference room window, he could see the riders, still standing, still silent, still waiting. How long has this been going on? He finally asked. At least 3 years, Logan said. Probably longer. Moss targeted riders because he figured we wouldn't report it. Bikers don't trust cops. And for good reason, as you can see. But it wasn't just us. He hit a civilian too. Guy driving home from his second shift asked for $200 cash to avoid a ticket for an air freshener hanging from his rearview mirror. That's the thing about corruption, Chief. Once you start, you don't stop. You just get bolder. Carter leaned back in his chair. He'd known Derek Moss for 12 years, hired him fresh out of the academy, watched him rise through patrol, get his 5-year pin, his 10-year pin, thought he was solid, reliable, the kind of officer who showed up on time, filed reports correctly, never caused problems. He'd been wrong. You understand this is serious, Carter said carefully. These are criminal allegations. If what you're saying is true, it is, Clay interrupted. His voice was quiet but firm, the voice of someone who'd spent 23 years learning when to speak and when to stay silent. And we've got more than this. We've got 23 riders willing to testify. We've got dates, times, locations. We've got bank records showing 31 unexplained cash deposits, totaling just under $40,000. We've got video evidence. We've got everything you need to make this stick. The only question is whether you're willing to do something about it. Carter looked at him, really looked. Saw the lines around his eyes, the calluses on his hands, the patch on his vest that said 23 years loyal. This wasn't some troublemaker looking to stir up noise. This was someone who'd been wronged and had chosen to fight back the only way he knew how, by showing up with 200 witnesses and refusing to be ignored. Carter looked out the window again. 200 riders still stood in perfect silence, waiting. If you believe justice should be served no matter the badge, hit that like button. We're just getting started. Why bring an army? Carter asked. You could have filed a complaint, gone through channels, let internal affairs handle it. Logan met his eyes. Because channels ignore people like us, because complaints get buried under paperwork and bureaucracy and the thin blue line that protects bad cops from consequences. Because we've seen it happen before. Someone files a complaint, it gets investigated, and 6 months later nothing changes except the person who complained gets harassed every time they get pulled over. We didn't come here to file a complaint, Chief. We came here to make sure you can't ignore us. Carter nodded slowly. He understood. More than that, he respected it. These people hadn't burned anything down, hadn't threatened anyone, hadn't broken a single law. They'd just shown up in numbers large enough to demand attention. "Give me 72 hours, Carter said. "I'll assign 2 detectives to investigate. If the evidence supports what you're saying, and I'm not doubting you, I'm following protocol, Moss will be suspended pending a full inquiry. If charges are warranted, I'll file them myself." Logan turned to Clay. Clay nodded. 72 hours, Logan said. "But Chief, we're not going away. We'll be watching. And if 72 hours turns into 72 weeks, we'll be back, with cameras, with lawyers, with every news station in the state." Carter stood, extended his hand. Logan shook it. "You'll get your justice," Carter said. "You have my word." "Good," Logan replied, "because in our world, a man's word is all he's got." They walked out together, crossed the lobby, stepped outside into the morning light. 200 faces turned toward them. "I've reviewed the evidence," Carter said, his voice carrying across the silent street. "An internal investigation begins today. Officer Moss is suspended pending a full inquiry. If these allegations are substantiated, he will face criminal charges. Not just departmental discipline, but actual criminal prosecution. You came here for justice. You'll get it. But I need you to trust the process. Give me time to do this right." He paused. 72 hours. "I'll have a preliminary report by Monday. You have my word." Logan stepped forward. "We good with that?" A rumble of agreement moved through the crowd. Not cheers, not celebration, just quiet acknowledgement that they'd been heard. "Monday," Logan said to Carter. "We'll be watching." One by one, the engines started. The convoy rolled out as quietly as it had arrived, a slow, deliberate exit that left Main Street empty and echoing, the sound of 200 motorcycles fading into the distance like a promise being carried on the wind. Inside the station, Derek Moss watched from a second-floor window, his badge already in Carter's desk drawer, his gun locked in the evidence room, his career unraveling faster than he could process. He'd taken money from the wrong biker, and now the whole world was about to know. The next 72 hours moved fast. Chief Carter assigned 2 detectives, Maria Santos and Tom Briggs, to handle the case. Santos was 39, 12 years in investigations, specializing in financial crimes and corruption cases. Briggs was 47, 20 years on the force, a former Marine who'd lost his left leg below the knee in Fallujah and refused to let it slow him down. They were good cops, honest cops. The kind who followed evidence wherever it led, even when it led to one of their own. They worked around the clock, pulling traffic stop records, reviewing body cam footage, interviewing witnesses, subpoenaing bank records. What they found was worse than anyone expected. Moss hadn't just been shaking down bikers. He'd been targeting anyone he thought wouldn't fight back. Migrant workers driving home from late shifts, tourists passing through on their way to the coast, college kids heading back to campus after visiting family, single mothers, elderly drivers, people who looked at a badge and saw authority they couldn't challenge. The pattern was consistent. Late-night stops, fabricated violations, cash demands calibrated to what the victim could afford. $50 from a college kid, $500 from someone driving a nice bike. No receipts, no documentation, just money changing hands and victims driving away too scared or too tired to fight back. The bank records told the story with brutal clarity. Moss had opened a separate savings account 3 years ago, one his wife didn't know about. 31 deposits over 36 months, always in amounts below $10,000 to avoid triggering federal reporting requirements. The total came to $39,550, nearly $40,000 stolen from people who trusted that the badge meant something. Detective Santos interviewed Clay on Sunday morning in a small office at the station. She was professional, thorough, taking notes by hand, even though everything was being recorded. "Why did you hand over the money?" she asked. Clay shrugged. "Because I knew fighting him on the road wouldn't change anything. It would have been his word against mine. And who do you think the system believes? The cop with the badge or the biker in leather? But bringing 200 witnesses to his doorstep? That might actually matter. That might force someone to pay attention. You could have called us directly, filed a complaint. Would you have believed me? Santos didn't answer immediately. She wanted to say yes, wanted to believe the system worked, but she'd been a cop long enough to know the truth. One biker's word against an officer's testimony, the case would have been closed before it was opened. Probably not, she admitted. But for what it's worth, I'm glad you did it this way. You gave us evidence we can't ignore. She interviewed Marcus next, then Nina, then Tommy, then 5 other riders who'd been hit by moss over the past 3 years. Their stories were identical in structure, but varied in detail. Different amounts, different violations, different threats. But the core was always the same. Pay up or lose your vehicle and your freedom. By Sunday afternoon, Santos and Briggs had enough to recommend charges. They presented their findings to Chief Carter in his office, laying out timelines and evidence and witness statements. Carter read everything twice. Then he picked up his phone and called the district attorney. By Monday morning, Derek Moss was under arrest. Carter called a press conference at 10:00 a.m. The station's small briefing room was packed with reporters from 3 counties, cameras rolling, microphones clustered on the podium. Logan and Clay stood in the back of the room, arms crossed, watching. Carter laid out the findings, explained the investigation, announced that Moss had been charged with 31 counts of extortion, official misconduct and theft. Bail was set at $50,000. Trial date pending. The cameras loved it. Corrupt cop taken down by biker army. 200 riders expose police corruption. Brotherhood demands justice and gets it. But for Clay, it wasn't about headlines. It wasn't about fame or vindication or feeling like a hero. It was about the quiet riders who'd never gotten their money back, the ones who'd swallowed the injustice because speaking up felt impossible, the ones who'd driven away from that traffic stop feeling small and powerless and alone. "We didn't do this for fame," Logan told a reporter outside the station. "We did it because someone had to, because corruption thrives when good people stay silent, because the only thing that stops a bad cop is good people refusing to look the other way," a reporter pushed forward. "Do you think this will change how police treat bikers?" Logan smiled faintly. "I think it'll remind them that we're not invisible, that when you take from one of us, you take from all of us, and that we don't forget. Ever." Clay walked up beside him. They shook hands for the cameras. Then they walked to their bikes and rode away, leaving the questions and microphones and spotlights behind. Because the road was calling, and the road didn't care about headlines. Derek Moss sat in county lockup, staring at concrete walls. The cell was 8 by 10, barely large enough for the metal cot and stainless steel toilet. The walls were beige, the floor was grey, and the fluorescent lights hummed constantly, a sound that burrowed into his skull and refused to leave. He'd been processed, fingerprinted, photographed, stripped of his uniform and his badge, and everything that had defined him for 16 years. His lawyer, a public defender named Rachel Kim, had visited on Monday afternoon. She was young, maybe 30, with dark circles under her eyes and a briefcase full of cases she was juggling simultaneously. She'd sat across from him in the consultation room and laid out the truth with brutal efficiency. "The evidence is overwhelming," she said. "The dashcam footage alone would bury you. Add the bank records, the witness statements, the pattern of behavior spanning 3 years, and you're looking at 5 to 7 years minimum. Maybe more if they charge you federally for the money laundering aspect." "Money laundering," Moss croaked. His voice was hoarse from crying, from panic, from the realization that his life was over. "You deposited the money in structured amounts to avoid federal reporting requirements. That's textbook laundering. The DA might not pursue it, but they could." "What about a plea deal?" Kim sighed. "I'll try. But honestly, Derek, you don't have much leverage. You're a cop who extorted civilians. The DA's going to want to make an example of you. Public trust in law enforcement is already fragile. This case gives them a chance to show they take corruption seriously. What do? You plead guilty. You allocute. That means you admit what you did and express remorse. You cooperate fully. Maybe we can get it down to 4 or 5 years, but you're going to prison. That's not negotiable." Moss had nodded numbly. Kim left, and he sat in that cell, staring at walls, replaying every moment that led him here. It had started small. 3 years ago, pulling over a biker who was doing 80 in a 65. The guy had offered him $50 to forget about it. Moss had taken it, told himself it was a one-time thing, that it didn't matter, that everybody bent the rules sometimes. But 1 time became 2, 2 became 10, 10 became routine. The money added up. He told himself he deserved it, that his salary was garbage, that the town didn't appreciate what he did, that taking a little extra from people who could afford it wasn't really stealing. He'd been wrong. His wife, Jennifer, stopped answering his calls after the 2nd day. He'd tried 12 times, left voicemails begging her to visit, to bring the kids, to give him a chance to explain. She never responded. Later, through Kim, he learned she'd filed for divorce and gotten a restraining order. The kids, 14-year-old Emma and 11-year-old Tyler, had been told their father was in jail for stealing. They didn't want to see him. His parents called once. His mother cried. His father said 6 words: "You shamed the whole damn family." Then they hung up. Meanwhile, the Iron Covenant kept riding. They didn't celebrate, didn't throw parties or post victory photos on social media. They just went back to the road, back to the thing that had always mattered most: brotherhood, loyalty, the promise that if one of them got hurt, all of them would answer. Clay returned to his routine, worked his shifts at the machine shop, picked up his daughter every other weekend, rode Route 9 on Tuesday nights, same stretch where Moss had pulled him over. The first time he rode past that spot after the arrest, he stopped, killed the engine, stood in the silence. Logan pulled up beside him a moment later, having followed without being asked. "You good?" Clay nodded. "Yeah, just needed to see it again, needed to know it was real." "It's real," Logan said. "Moss is done. Carter's cleaning house. The whole department's getting audited. Internal Affairs is reviewing every traffic stop from the last 5 years. 3 more officers are under investigation. Think it'll stick?" "It better. We made sure the whole state was watching." They stood there for a while, 2 riders on an empty highway, the wind carrying the smell of rain and distant lightning. "You know what the best part is?" Clay said. "What?" "Every rider who got shaken down, the ones who paid and stayed silent because they thought nobody would believe them, they're going to hear about this, and they're going to know someone stood up. That's worth more than $500. That's worth everything." Logan clapped him on the shoulder. "Damn right it is." They rode home together side by side, headlights cutting through the dark. 3 months later, Derek Moss stood before Judge Helena Vargas in Pineville District Court. The courtroom was packed. Riders filled the back rows. Not in colors, not in leather, just people dressed in jeans and button-downs and dresses, people who'd taken the day off work to see justice delivered. Clay sat in the 2nd row, arms crossed, watching. Marcus sat beside him. Nina was 3 rows back. Tommy stood near the door, unable to sit still, shifting his weight from foot to foot. The gallery also held victims. The college kid who'd paid $50 he needed for textbooks. The migrant worker who'd paid $200 that represented a week's wages. The single mother who'd paid $150 she'd been saving for her son's birthday. They'd all been contacted by the DA's office, asked to provide impact statements, given a chance to be heard. Moss's lawyer, Rachel Kim, stood beside him at the defense table. She'd negotiated a plea deal. Guilty to 15 counts of extortion in exchange for dropping the remaining 16 charges and the potential federal money laundering case. The sentencing guidelines recommended 4 to 8 years. Judge Vargas was 58, a former prosecutor who'd been appointed to the bench 12 years ago. She had a reputation for being fair but firm, for handing down sentences that reflected both the crime and the defendant's history. She'd read every page of the case file, reviewed every witness statement, watched the dashcam footage 3 times. The bailiff called the court to order. Everyone stood. Judge Vargas entered, took her seat, surveyed the room. "Mr. Moss, please rise." Moss stood. He'd lost 20 pounds in 3 months. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. He wore an orange jumpsuit because he'd been unable to make bail. His hands were cuffed in front of him. Kim made her final plea for leniency. Talked about his 16 years of service, his military background, his family, his remorse. "Your Honor," she said, "my client has accepted responsibility for his actions. He's pleaded guilty. He's cooperated fully with investigators. He's expressed genuine remorse to the victims. While his crimes are serious, he's not a violent offender. He's not a danger to the community. A sentence of 4 years, with credit for time served and the possibility of parole, would serve the interests of justice while allowing him to eventually rebuild his life." Judge Vargas listened without expression. The DA, a woman named Patricia Owens, stood for rebuttal. "Your Honor, Derek Moss wasn't just a bad cop. He was a predator. He identified vulnerable people and exploited them. He stole nearly $40,000 over 3 years. He betrayed the public trust in the most fundamental way. His victims didn't fight back because they believed the badge gave him power they couldn't challenge. A 4-year sentence would send the message that corruption is tolerable if you apologize afterward. It's not." Owens paused. "The state recommends the maximum, 8 years, no parole eligibility for at least 5. Judge Vargas made notes. Then she looked at Moss. "Mr. Moss, do you have anything to say before I impose sentence?" Moss cleared his throat. His voice cracked. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean much. I know it doesn't give back the money or undo what I did. But I am sorry. I made terrible choices. I hurt people. I betrayed everything I swore to uphold. I deserve to be punished." He paused, tears streaming down his face. "I just hope someday my kids will forgive me." Judge Vargas studied him for a long moment. Then she spoke. "Mr. Moss, you didn't just break the law. You broke the trust that binds law enforcement to the community. You targeted vulnerable people because you believed they wouldn't fight back. You were wrong. They did fight back, not with violence, but with courage, organization, and a demand for accountability that you couldn't ignore or intimidate." She paused. "This court recognizes your guilty plea and your cooperation, but it also recognizes the severity and scope of your crimes. You stole from 31 people over 3 years. You enriched yourself at their expense. You made them feel powerless. That requires a sentence that reflects both punishment and deterrence." She looked at the paperwork in front of her. "I hereby sentence you to 6 years in state prison, followed by 5 years probation. You will be required to pay full restitution to all identified victims. You will surrender your law enforcement certification permanently. You will have no contact with any victims. Do you understand?" Moss nodded, unable to speak. The gavel came down. 2 bailiffs led him out in handcuffs. He didn't look back, didn't make eye contact with anyone in the gallery, just shuffled through the side door and disappeared into the system he'd once represented. Outside the courthouse, Logan gave a brief statement to the press. "This isn't about revenge. It's about accountability. Officer Moss had power, and he abused it. Today the system worked. That's all we ever asked for." A reporter pushed forward. "Do you think this will change how police treat bikers?" Logan smiled faintly. "I think it'll remind them that we're not invisible, that when you take from one of us, you take from all of us, and that we don't forget, we don't back down, and we don't stop until justice is served." Clay walked up beside him. They shook hands for the cameras. Then they walked to their bikes and rode away, leaving the courthouse and the questions and the circus behind, because the road was waiting, and the road was home. 6 months after the sentencing, Route 9 looked the same as it always had. Same curves, same potholes, same billboards advertising motels that would never reopen, same stretches of farmland and forest, punctuated by the occasional gas station or roadside diner. But something had changed. Riders passed through Pineville now without fear. Word had spread, not just locally but regionally, nationally. The story had been picked up by biker magazines, podcasts, YouTube channels. 200 riders take down corrupt cop. Iron Covenant demands justice and gets it. The narrative resonated because it was true, because it was proof that standing up mattered, that silence was complicity, that sometimes the only way to win was to refuse to be ignored. Cops in Pineville waved now when riders passed. The local diner, Betty's Kitchen, started serving free coffee to anyone wearing colors. The owner, a woman named Betty Hartman, who'd run the place for 33 years, put up a sign, "Veterans and riders eat first." Chief Carter retired the following spring. In his farewell speech at the town council meeting, he mentioned the Iron Covenant by name, thanked them for holding the department accountable, for forcing him to look at systems he'd taken for granted, for reminding him that a badge wasn't a shield against criticism. "Those riders could have burned this town down," Carter said. "They could have gotten violent. They could have made us their enemies. Instead, they showed up with evidence, with witnesses, with cameras, and with a demand that we do our jobs. That's not a threat. That's citizenship, and we should all be grateful they cared enough to hold us to a higher standard." The new chief, Paula Hendricks, promoted from sergeant, implemented reforms. Body cameras became mandatory. Traffic stop data became public. A civilian oversight board was established. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Clay still rode Route 9 every Tuesday, still stopped at the same spot where Moss had pulled him over. But now, instead of anger, he felt something else. Pride. Not in what he'd done alone, but in what they'd done together. In the 200 riders who'd answered the call. In the brothers and sisters who'd shown up at dawn because one of their own had been wronged. In the proof that loyalty wasn't just a word on a patch. It was a promise kept. One night, Logan called him. "You ever think about that morning? 200 bikes rolling into town." "Every time I ride past the station," Clay said. He was in his garage, wiping down his bike, getting ready for a weekend run to the mountains. "You know what I remember most?" Logan asked. "What?" "The silence. 200 riders, and not one of us had to say a word. They just knew. That's what brotherhood looks like. That's what loyalty looks like, not the patches or the leather or the noise. The quiet moments when everyone shows up without being asked." Clay smiled. "Yeah, it is. We changed something, Clay. Not just in Pineville, everywhere. Riders are standing up now, filing complaints, recording traffic stops, demanding accountability. We showed them it's possible." "That's good," Clay said. "That's what it was supposed to be about." They talked for a while longer. About upcoming rides, about new members, about the road ahead. Logan mentioned that 3 other chapters had dealt with similar situations in the past 6 months, and in all 3 cases, the riders had mobilized, gathered evidence, and demanded investigations. In 2 cases, the cops were fired. In the 3rd, the department issued a public apology and implemented new training. The movement was spreading, not through violence or intimidation, through organization, evidence, and the refusal to stay silent. When the call ended, Clay walked outside. The night smelled like rain and gasoline, that familiar scent that meant home, that meant freedom, that meant the road was calling. He started his bike, felt the engine hum beneath him, steady, loyal, familiar. He thought about Derek Moss, sitting in a cell somewhere, probably wondering how his life had unraveled so completely. Clay didn't take pleasure in it, didn't celebrate someone else's destruction, but he didn't regret it either, because justice wasn't about revenge. It was about consequences. It was about making sure that power came with responsibility, that badges came with accountability, that the people who wore uniforms remembered they served the public, not the other way around. Clay rolled out of his driveway and onto the street, heading toward Route 9. The moon was full, casting silver light across the asphalt. The wind was cool. The road was empty. He thought about his daughter, 17 now, getting ready for college, talking about studying criminal justice because she wanted to fix systems that were broken. He'd told her about what happened with Moss, about the convoy, about the investigation. She'd looked at him with something like awe. "You did that?" she'd asked. "We did that," he'd corrected. "All of us. Together. I want to be like that," she'd said. "I want to stand up when something's wrong." "Then you will," he'd told her. "Because that's what we do. We show up, we keep promises, and we don't back down." He reached Route 9, turned south, opened the throttle. The Harley responded instantly, surging forward, eating up the miles. He passed the spot where Moss had pulled him over. Didn't stop this time, didn't need to, because that chapter was closed. The promise had been kept, the brotherhood had answered, and the road stretched ahead, endless, open, full of possibility. Behind him, in the distance, he heard another engine. Then another. He glanced in his mirror and smiled. Marcus, Nina, Tommy, 5 others from the local chapter, riding in formation, closing the distance. They'd known where he'd be. Knew he rode Route 9 every Tuesday. Knew he'd be heading south toward the mountains. So they'd shown up. Not because they'd been asked, but because that's what family did. Clay slowed. Let them catch up. They fell into formation around him, 2 by 2, staggered, maintaining distance and speed with the precision of people who'd been riding together for decades. No words were exchanged. No signals were needed. They just rode. The convoy moved through the night like a promise being kept, engines synchronized, headlights painting the road ahead in gold and white. They passed through sleeping towns where streetlights flickered and dogs barked at the sound of their passing. They climbed into the foothills where the air grew cooler and the stars grew brighter, and the road twisted through pine forests that smelled like Christmas and childhood. At midnight, they stopped at a pull-off overlooking a valley. The town of Asheville glittered in the distance. A constellation of lights spread across the darkness. They killed their engines, stood in silence, breathing in the mountain air, listening to the wind move through the trees. "You know what's funny?" Marcus said finally, breaking the silence. "A year ago, I would have just paid that cop and moved on. Would have told myself it wasn't worth fighting, that nothing would change. And now," Clay asked, "now I know better. Now I know that standing up matters, that evidence matters, that showing up with 200 witnesses matters, that the system only works when we force it to work." Nina nodded. "My daughter asked me about it last week. Said they talked about it in her civics class. Her teacher used it as an example of peaceful protest, of organizing for change without violence. She was proud of me. That meant more than anything." Tommy leaned against his bike, arms crossed. "The fire department had a meeting about it. Chief wanted to know if any of us had been shaken down by cops. 3 guys raised their hands. Turns out it's been happening for years. Not just to bikers, but to firefighters, to EMTs, to anyone who works weird hours and drives home alone on back roads. We filed formal complaints. The county's investigating." Clay listened, realized that what they'd done wasn't just about Derek Moss, wasn't just about $500 or one corrupt cop or one traffic stop on Route 9. It was about something bigger, about proving that ordinary people could demand accountability, that systems could change when enough people refused to accept injustice as inevitable. "We started something," Logan said quietly. He'd pulled up during the conversation, parked beside Clay, listened without announcing himself. "I've been getting calls from chapters in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, riders dealing with the same thing, crooked cops, shakedowns, the assumption that we won't fight back. They want to know how we did it. What evidence we gathered, how we organized, how we got 200 riders to show up at dawn without any of them breaking the law or giving the cops an excuse to arrest us." "What are you telling them?" Clay asked. "I'm telling them the truth. Document everything. Body cameras, dash cams, phone recordings. Get witness statements in writing. Build a case that's so airtight they can't ignore it. Then show up, not with violence, not with threats, but with presence. With numbers, with the quiet power of people who refuse to be invisible anymore." Marcus grinned. "We're writing a playbook." "Damn right we are," Logan replied. Because this isn't just about us. It's about everyone who's been taken advantage of by someone in a position of power. It's about changing the narrative from bikers are criminals to bikers are citizens who demand accountability. They stood there for another 20 minutes, talking about rides they'd done, brothers they'd lost, promises they'd kept. Then, without anyone suggesting it, they mounted up and headed back down the mountain, back toward home, back toward the lives they'd built around loyalty and leather and the open road. Clay arrived home at 2:47 a.m. His daughter's light was still on. She'd waited up, probably doing homework, probably texting friends, probably living the kind of normal teenage life he'd never had. He walked inside quietly, not wanting to wake her, but her door opened. "Dad?" "Yes, sweetie. Sorry I'm late." She walked out in sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Where'd you go?" "Just a ride. Route 9, up to the mountains. Some of the brothers joined me." She smiled. "The brothers who showed up that morning, when you went to the police station?" "Yeah, those brothers. That was really cool, Dad, what you did. I told my friends about it. They think you're like a superhero or something." Clay laughed. "I'm not a superhero. I'm just a guy who got tired of letting bad things happen without doing anything about it." "That's what makes you a superhero," she said. "Superheroes are just regular people who decide to stand up." She hugged him. He hugged her back, feeling the weight of everything that had happened, everything that had changed, everything that mattered. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "I'm proud of you too," he said. "Now go to bed. You've got school in 6 hours." She laughed, disappeared back into her room. Clay stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the silence, feeling the exhaustion settle into his bones. He walked to his own room, collapsed onto the bed fully clothed, and was asleep before his head hit the pillow. And he dreamed of the road, of 200 riders standing in silence, of promises kept and justice served, and a world where standing up mattered more than staying quiet. When he woke the next morning, the sun was streaming through his window, and his phone was buzzing with messages from the group chat. "Logan, ride this weekend, thinking Smoky Mountains. Weather's supposed to be perfect. Marcus, I'm in. Nina, count me. Tommy, hell yes." Clay smiled, typed a response. Wouldn't miss it. Because that's what they did. They rode. They kept promises. They showed up for each other. And when the world tried to make them invisible, they roared louder until the whole damn state had no choice but to listen. The road was calling, and the road was home. Thanks for riding with us. If this story reminded you why honor matters, hit subscribe. We've got more journeys ahead. See you on the next one.